So, last year for Zero Base One's anniversary, I made a video about the group and each of the members, and that video got way more views than I thought it would, which meant that a few mistakes I'd made also became obvious to people. And I thought I'd said everything I had to say about the members of Zero Base One in that video, but it turns out I actually have more to say. Not a lot more to say, hence a minisode, not an episode, but definitely things to say about two people in particular. You've read the title, you know who I'm talking about. Yes, Haobin. The men, the myths, the legends, the two dudes who took over the K-pop industry more than even I or their Boys Planet fans possibly could have imagined. Mind you, I guess that's half the point of a produce group, right? I wanted to take the chance in this video to provide corrections and updates to my first Zero Base One video, as well as to have a closer look at each of the two members of Haobin and their collective impact. Except I stuffed up and did it again. Made a minisode too long. So in this video, I'll provide corrections and updates to my original Zero Base One video, and then I want to look at the history of the Haobin ship and where it has led us to today, and what each person brings to the table. In the second part, I'll take a look at the Haobin fans, the negatives of the fandom, and then on a more positive note, the power of Haobin, specifically in publicity and fanfiction. Then I'll consider the implications of Haobin on survival shows and produce, the industry, and Zhanghao and Hanbin themselves. I'll give a trigger warning now for both parts of the video. Boys Planet and survival shows, rabid K-pop fans, real person fanfiction and shipping, and the fetishization of gay men. Some of those kind of aren't triggers, but I'll mention them anyway since they could well turn a person off this video. So with that said, let's get into it, starting actually not with the history of Haobin, but with corrections and updates from my previous Zero Base One episode. Alright, let's start with this massive comment which corrected several details of my video. To start with, despite having looked up the pronunciation before starting, I still managed to pronounce Zhanghao's name wrong during the entire video. Good job, Casper. Hence, I've done my best to correct that in this video. It's a bit hard when I've got into the habit of saying Zhanghao in my head, but I believe in the importance of doing our best to pronounce names correctly. Hence, I hope I didn't stuff up anything in this video, but if I did, please let me know. Politely, of course. Second, they point out that Zhanghao had 2 M Countdown performances on the show, whereas I said that I thought Jiwoong was the only one who had 2. Third, this person believes that Gunnock actually didn't start the dance club at his high school, rather was just the first boy to join. I had a quick look and it seems like this is right, so I clearly remembered that wrong, so I'm sorry about the accidental misinformation there. You know, while I'm on the topic of Gunnock, I'll also correct something that no one has actually picked me up on. I said that he had been a vocalist on Wild Idol, and that's false. He actually auditioned as a rapper. This in turn made my statement that none of the Zero Base One members were actually rappers incorrect. Gunnock was the only one. Good on him, you know, but at the same time, the group treats him more as a vocalist and only really uses him as a rapper as a last resort, so I don't really know what's going on there. Next, they pointed out how my perception of Matthew being advantaged as an ethnically Korean member of the G group was a westernized perspective, correctly noting how Korean people tend to see Korean diaspora as being different to them. This is true, but as they also said, he probably still had some small advantage from being ethnically Korean and not an evil Chinese person. I added the last part to that. Sorry, I've been editing the Girls Planet video recently and seeing all the C group editing. Next, they disagreed with my statement that I felt that solo stands and toxicity were affecting Zero Base One far less than Kepler. To be fair to me, I had pretty much never seen any Zero Base One fandom toxicity before making that video, and have since witnessed a lot more. That said, I do still think that even though many fans are rabid, and we'll discuss many of those fans in this video, the fandom toxicity of Zero Base One has still statistically affected them far less than Kepler. I mean, if nothing else, their sales are still going strong. I'm recording this script around 1 week after Blue Paradise released, and Zero Base One are still the only group to have sold over 1 million albums for every single album, so I don't feel too bad about their fandom right now, honestly. They also talked about Takuto and girl group markets. First, that girl groups don't dominate the market ever. Although I agree with them that boy groups always outperform girl groups in terms of sales and most other metrics, I do think that success is to some extent subjective. In terms of, you will think of someone as more successful if you hear about them more and less successful if you don't. And how much you hear about a person or an artist is based a lot on the things you're interested in and the spaces you frequent and people you associate yourself with. I think most people accept 2 things about K-pop. 1, that girl groups have more wide appeal while boy groups have stronger fandoms who buy and stream more, and 2, that the end of 4th gen was characterized by the popularity of many girl groups, in comparison to the start of the generation, which was far more boy group dominated. In comparison being the key words here. Next, Takuto. I said that all of the supposed dozens on Boys Planet were eliminated early compared to Girls Planet, and this person correctly pointed out how Takuto actually wasn't eliminated early and made it to the second last round. This is true, but let me explain my thinking. Takuto was the only supposed dozen to make it to the second last round. Everyone else was eliminated earlier and no one made it to the final round, which was a big complaint OT8s had with Girls Planet and with Bahie. Anyway, nice comment, thank you, and thanks for your input. Alright, on to other issues. A lot of people also commented on how I'd presented Gyuvin and expressed their dissatisfaction about how small his portion of the video was, or how they felt that I otherwise misrepresented him and made him potentially seem less emotionally and generally intelligent and thoughtful than he actually is. And this was one of the issues with my video, I can admit it. I don't know that much about Gyuvin, but I have since learned more, so let me say a few things. As I mentioned in my original video, Gyuvin seems like a genuinely lovely and caring person. Everyone in the group and the rest of the show love him, and whether it be because of his visuals, his stage presence, or something else, he was always super popular in live performances, which is an amazing thing to have and will likely give him a great future career path. He has tons of options and has been steadily growing said options through the group. I can easily see him in a group as an actor, as an MC, or becoming an influencer after the show, although realistically Yuhua are probably creating a post-Zero Base One boy group. The only entity that doesn't seem to like Gyuvin is Mnet, and Mnet are horrible, so Gyuvin fans, please ignore Mnet being mean to your bias. I also found out, as I mentioned in my Hui video, that Gyuvin was the one Hui went to when he was stressed on the show, and gave him lots of support. Considering Hui was the one other trainees went to on the show, and was a semi-father figure and mentor to many of the other trainees, I think it says volumes about Gyuvin's character that he was the support system for Hui of all people. If nothing else, it suggests that he has high maturity and emotional intelligence, as many of his fans pointed out in my comments. Gyuvin may act incredibly silly and goofy at times, but it's clear that he has a variety show personality he switches on and then switches off when needed, which is a perfect skill for an idol to have. Okay, so this minisode isn't about Gyuvin, but I hope I've managed to clear up any misconceptions that I don't like him through all of what I've just said. As I've said in my original video, he's one of the most essential members for Zero Base One's image, and every single member of the group contributes something to it, so OT8s go away. A final update before I finish. When I made my previous Zero Base One episode, Gunnock and Matthew had only just become a notable ship, and the update is that now they've taken over. Gunnock has pretty consistently been the least featured and least shipped member in the group for a long time, or at least as far as AO3 statistics go. However, now Gunnock and Matthew are the fourth most popular ship on AO3, having surpassed Hanbin and Matthew and being on the verge of beating Jiwoong and Matthew, a ship which is almost dead in the water now. I don't know how I feel about this. On one hand, I guess I'm happy Gunnock is getting more attention. On the other hand, I have a certain disdain for real person shipping, so I guess as long as Gunnock's happy, I'm happy? Alright, with that awkwardly said, let's move on to the heroes of this minisode, Haobin, and their history. This is a lot, but I'll keep it as brief as possible. The casting for Boys Planet, the male sequel to 2021's Girls Planet 999, began in late 2021 to early 2022, with final contestants chosen in mid-2022. The show itself was pushed back, initially intended to air in 2022, and teasers began to be unveiled at the end of 2022. The release of the theme song Here I Am on December 29th, 2022 was our first introduction to the heroes of this minisode and of the show, sung Hanbin and Zhanghao, who were the respective centers of K and G group and of the show. The first episode of the show was released on February 2nd and thus Haobin. Haobin were both introduced on the show as incredibly capable and determined competitors, although as a Korean, Hanbin was of course given a greater highlight, which even showed his ability to go toe-to-toe with the judges of all people. Despite this, he was given 3 stars, while Zhanghao was given 4, but Hanbin was able to catch up during the signal song test, where both were made centers of their respective groups and were, understandably and humbly, pleasantly surprised. Now, pairing the centers makes sense, but Haobin were different. As I discussed in my Zero Base 1 episode, there were Haobin shippers from the start, but they were overshadowed by the Hanbin-Matthew shippers. But when we get to episode 6, well, things change, don't they? Hanbin and Zhanghao both chose Tomboy, and well, you already know that I love Tomboy Team and I've spoken extensively about all 4 members of it. As I discussed in both my Hui episode and my Zero Base 1-1, Tomboy was perfect. Gunnock and Hui were both capable performers who didn't need storylines to respectively get into the group and not make it as Mnet wanted. Hence, Haobin could get all of the development and screen time. Tomboy was the real birth of Haobin, and blasted the ship so high it may as well have travelled across the entire known universe by now. The whole point of Tomboy was that Zhanghao and Hanbin had been brought closer together, and both had insecurities they were happy to help the other with. Neither quite thought they would be good enough, despite all evidence to the contrary, and the other party, as Mnet made a point of showing us, was always willing to drop everything and rush to his partner's side at a moment's notice. I hope I don't need to tell you why that made the shippers go crazy. Suddenly, everything was Haobin. I kid you not. Don't forget that the 3-hour Haobin movie exists somewhere. I haven't found it, but it exists. And actually, after I wrote this script, I did find it. The second elimination did nothing to help this. Zhanghao had risen to rank 2, and now there was a sexy rivalry thing going on for first place. And then in the artist battle, Zhanghao decides to ask Hanbin for help choreographing the dance break for Over Me, and including tutting elements. Wow, said the shippers. Hanbin and Zhanghao were always popular, but the shipping made them infinitely more so, especially considering, as I'll discuss later, their associations with queer culture, which made this ship seem, actually realistic and maybe not just pure delusion. This popularity made it easy for them to become the centers of the final battle, with Jelly Pop and Hot Summer. Who cares if they deserved those positions? It was a symbolic battle. Speaking of, they were rank 1 and 2. In even more symbolism, they ended up where they started, at the top, together, doing a very romantic Here I Am bridge. But this time, Zhanghao finally ended up on top, and he may or may not have kissed Hanbin? And the crowd went wild. I've already mentioned how fans said that the finale was Haobin's wedding with the other members of the group as their best men, and honestly, it's not hard to see. And it got worse after debut. There was even more Haobin footage, and you know the fans loved it. They have a wedding pose photo card which apparently sells for more than the price of a full album. This is anecdotal evidence, and every post with the two of them is flooded with Haobin comments. And as with all K-pop shipping, even a look in the other's direction is proof of love. But I mean, Zhanghao kissed Hanbin, right? So is it proof or is it proof? Friendly reminder that I don't condone real person romantic or sexual shipping, although I do find the Haobin ship hilarious and interesting regardless of whether there is or isn't an actual romantic relationship there. At the time of writing this script in late February 2025, Zhanghao has been teased to be on the second season of the single best K-pop reality show of all time, Subin's My Fave's Fave. And although it seems like he's talking about durians, a lot of people were convinced he'd be talking about Hanbin. Haobin at present day are the face of Zero Base One, the same way they were the face of Boys Planet. They are everywhere, at the top of the line distributions, in the center of every performance, on every variety show, on every fan's feed, the face of the group, the high notes of the group, the unbeatable top ship of the group and of 5th gen, and so on and so on and so on. As I'll discuss later, it's got so bad that some new fans and non-fans genuinely think that Haobin is a single person. Wow, imagine being so infatuated with each other that you literally merge. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about each of our protagonists. In this section, I'll discuss some things that each member brings to the table for this ship, starting with the similarities between them, because I think that one of the things that Haobin fans find so charming about this pair is how they're so similar, yet of course they are individual people. Okay, so first of all, both Hanbin and Zhanghao are older than the average survival show contestant and survival show group member. Hanbin was 22 when the show started and Zhanghao was 23. This meant that both of them had time to develop as human beings outside of the show and the idol training system, and both used this time very well to become more well-rounded individuals. Their age meant that Hanbin and Zhanghao were more mentally and emotionally stable on the show, were able to take criticism well while also self-reflecting, showed good leadership skills, were mentor figures for many of the other trainees, and developed extra skills. For instance, Zhanghao's violin skills and Hanbin's knowledge of various dance styles including tutting and whacking. Speaking of skills, they both showed high levels of dance and vocal skill on the show, and were pretty equally matched. Hence they became the centres of their respective groups, and that already made comparisons between them in and of itself. They were both highly praised, both showed consistent growth and a desire to improve and stretch themselves, were given similar arcs where they lacked confidence and had to get better, and were both shown as incredibly selfless and empathetic. They were also both shown to be pretty much perfect. They never made any major mistakes on the show and had both perfect performance and perfect character, to the point that both seemed inhuman. I talked about this in my Zero Base One episode in more detail. Hanbin was the perfect man, and Zhanghao was the perfect Chinese contestant. Remember, of course, that he can't be the best person ever because he is Chinese and Mnet hate Chinese people, so he had to settle for being second to Hanbin. Zhanghao's single best moment of perfection on the show was how, after he lost the killing part of Tomboy to Hanbin, he expressed excitement that he could do Uki's part, Uki being a Chinese member of Idol. He also then expressed his desire to pronounce the Korean lyrics correctly, which showed two things. First, that he was capable of respecting and appreciating his own culture, and that he was, more importantly, capable of respecting the culture of the country he was going to work in, Korea. Both also showed extreme levels of humbleness. Neither showed any envy for the other or for other contestants, and both were humble about their achievements and skills. This, of course, ties into their selflessness and their perfect characters on the show. They also seem to have a similar sense of humour and similar styles of stage presence. Their stage presence blends nicely together, and I think they're a very cohesive performance unit. They're also both interested in teaching and have teaching experience. Zhanghao is qualified to teach, I believe as a music teacher, and Hanbin used to want to be a teacher and has taught dance classes. This is kind of funny to me. There was a guy in my year in high school who was a bit like Hanbin and was also the captain of the school when we were in our final year, and he also became a teacher, which is funny. I guess those kinds of guys just like teaching. Anyway, this teaching brings me back to a few things. One, both are incredibly intelligent, both academically, socially, and emotionally. Two, they have an interest in leadership and helping others. And three, they're both older, which gave them time to have this extra education past high school, which also, by the way, increases emotional maturity and helps someone develop as a person. So they're less likely to be baited into predatory contracts and thus can, to some extent, manipulate Mnet and the industry rather than being manipulated. Which, good for them. And it has good implications for the industry too. To be fair, these traits, older, intelligent, more mature, and thus less easy to manipulate, is something that applies to most of the members of Zero Base One, and thus is something that sets the group apart from other survival show groups and other groups in general. Do you see how all of these things are connected? Finally, I wanted to mention something else I mentioned in my Zero Base One video. Both Hanbin and Zhanghao have extensive associations with the arts and associations with queer culture. Hanbin through his varied dance experience, including dance styles like whacking and tutting with associations with queer culture, and Zhanghao through literally being heterophobic and a cut sleeve. So with those similarities discussed, let's quickly discuss some unique quirks for each of the pair, since, as I said, they may be similar, but they are in fact not the same person, believe it or not. Let's start with Mr. Perfect himself. The guy people write about, saying that if he wasn't in a relationship with a, quote, Chinese twink, the birth rate in Korea would be through the roof. I think these kinds of statements are hilarious, but also kind of true. Although I'm sure at least part of it is a persona, Hanbin really does seem like the perfect man, and being empathetic and able to show and understand his emotions is one of the signals to many women that he would be a good partner, hence one of the reasons he's so popular. A lot of women also appreciate gay men or men who are comfortable with gay men and or with their masculinity and or with their sexuality. And although Hanbin hasn't explicitly said or done any of these things, his dance associations with queer culture and his past dance clips, ahem, like Mother, paint this image of him. This queer association, as we will also see with Zhanghao, means 1. Gay people attach themselves to him and love him. 2. People who fetishize gay men love him. And 3. Women who are scared of men feel less threatened by him and thus like him more. So basically, literally everyone who isn't a straight toxic man is more likely to like him. Hanbin has arguably the more straight-laced image of the two. He's extroverted and a social butterfly and is great at handling awkward situations well in the moment. This made him the perfect MC, and it seems like if he does nothing else for the rest of his life, he will in fact be an MC. Hanbin is also the leader figure in this pair. Duh, since he's literally the leader, and is, of course, supportive and kind. Fearfully wading through the depths of Haobin fanfiction on AO3, it seems the fandom has decided that he's the overprotective top who has a stable career and his life sorted out, is oblivious to his own feelings, but is nonetheless whipped. He's the one who poor, anxious, and possibly bullied gay Zhanghao can go to for a safe shoulder to cry on, and a heart to unintentionally seduce. The impression of Hanbin's fandom personality I get from these thumbnails makes sense. He genuinely does seem protective and like a social butterfly in real life, and he certainly seems to have his life sorted out, although we've seen that he's definitely more anxious on the inside than he puts on. The whipped but oblivious thing is also hilarious, since many a clip exists of Zhanghao existing and Hanbin just fondly staring on before realizing he's on camera. And that's just peak cinema regardless of your interpretation of their relationship. So that's nice, but if there is a singular person who is the main character of Boys Planet, Zero Base One, and K-pop in general, I'm sorry to say it's not Hanbin. Hanbin's the love interest of the world, but to be a love interest, you need a main character self-insert, don't you? Alright, time to talk about Zhanghao. Yep, the main character, and someone who probably has become a self-insert for many a fan for better or worse. Alright, so first of all, Zhanghao is heterophobic. No more needs to be said. He also seems to have a literally endless list of skills and qualifications. I feel like there is literally nothing he's bad at. He was also perfect on the show and has an amazing storyline which highlighted him and his growth and led him to the top in the finale, where he literally made history. This storyline of losing faith that he would ever be good enough, / as good as Hanbin, / better than Hanbin, / whatever the shippers want, and then being victorious finally in the finale is really unbeatable. He was doomed from the start, being Chinese, and yet still miraculously prevailed. Or so Mnet would tell you. The fans would point out how he unintentionally got revenge for Zhaoting and Urina fittingly, considering those two contributed to his first place outcome. The pyramid of global trainees. I feel like the show really highlighted his intelligence, or at least that was the main thing I took away from his time on the show. He also got the brilliant visual calling card of the uneven sleeves, or cut sleeves, on the show, which has continued to some extent in the group. It's brilliant. I talked about this more in the Zero Base One episode, but I am indeed in love with Zhanghao's uneven sleeves and wish for them to continue for the rest of his life. In fanfiction, he seems to have turned into the soft-spoken, bookish and quiet one of the pair, always in a corner studying and incredibly introverted and maybe even inexperienced in social situations. He's hopelessly crushing on Hanbin, but also completely and utterly insecure and thinks he's worthless. You know, now that I say it, he really does sound like a Mary Sue self-insert, doesn't he? Oh, I'm really ugly, but actually everyone thinks I'm insanely gorgeous. I'm smart and I get the best grades, but I do everything effortlessly and, I kind of think I'm dumb. I want to selflessly become a teacher, but really I could do whatever I want. Yes, I am good at dancing and also rapping, and also I can play instruments, and also I can sing. I'm even a main vocal level singer, but really I don't think I'm that good. I have a lot of hobbies, but I just dabble, even though I'm always good at everything I do. Actually, my biggest flaw is that I'm clumsy and socially awkward, but my crush finds that super adorable. Also, I lack confidence, but literally could not become any better. And everyone loves me, and anyone who doesn't love me is the villain. Oh, I'm also the super duper special savior of Chinese idols everywhere, and I'm literally the chosen one to be the first foreign center on an Mnet show. I'll leave it there, but I'm sure I could go on a lot longer. While Hanbin's fanfiction characterization seems similar enough to his real personality, Zhanghao has obviously been changed a lot, and I say obviously because as the designated self-insert character of this pairing, his personality is permitted to be moulded into whatever it needs to be for the story, and thus it is also necessary that it is moulded. Zhanghao was never a trembling, shy baby who didn't have a confident bone in his body and has no self-awareness. He has always been hardworking, confident and determined enough to chase his dreams, and has had the self-reflection skills to grow consistently and work with the system rather than being manipulated by and puppeted by it. Oddly enough, to prove my point, there's this post from a while ago which talks about how he was a, quote, average university student. But he was never average. He was always incredibly intelligent and a high achiever academically and in other areas of life. He was always working hard to bring himself up from the bottom or close to it, and he always had a wide range of interests which gave him the perfect foundation for his life. He has always been far from ordinary, and this post even mentions these things, but saying that he was an average person not only idolizes him, but makes it easier, subconsciously, for him to become a self-insert for average audience members, hence the point of a Mary Sue. This post also deifies him for things which many an idol has done, and makes several very personal assumptions about him and his inner thoughts which make me uncomfortable. But the deification and infantilization of idols, especially male idols, is nothing new. So, topic for a different video, I guess. So on that somewhat depressing note, let's end this minisode. I'll talk more about the fans, their positive power and negative impacts, and the implications of the ship in the next part of the minisode. Haobin were introduced to us at the end of December 2022 when they were presented as the two centres of the K and G group for Mnet's survival show Boys Planet. This was all well and good, and as the centres of the signal song based on previous produce statistics, they were pretty much guaranteed to debut right from the start. However, even Mnet couldn't possibly predict their popularity. As both joined Tomboy Team for the second round of the show, the star-crossed lovers Romeo and Juliet arc was firmly lifted from Hanbin and Matthew and planted onto Hanbin and Zhanghao, who seemed well and truly, in love. Hence, the two debuted as rank 1 and 2 of the show, and they have well and truly taken over. In this part, I discussed their similarities, being older than the average survival show contestant, very intelligent, interested in teaching, with high levels of skill, especially in dance and vocals, humble, perfect survival show contestants, and most importantly, having, in K-pop terms, extensive connections with queer culture. I also discussed what each member brings to the table, and we saw in this part and will continue to see in the next part that Zhanghao has been assigned a quiet, almost demure and insecure personality, while Hanbin has been assigned a more protective, outgoing and extroverted personality. Why these personalities when both of these people have displayed both sets of traits? Well, I'll discuss that a bit more in the Power of Haobin section in the next part. So with that said, we're at the end of this part of the minisode. I'll upload the second part at the same time as this one, so you can go and visit that right now if you want, to learn more about Haobin's fans and the implications of the ship. So thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in part 2.